name is Davis Aaron Anderson. I am Manager of Programs and Partnerships here at Metro. It's my honor to introduce Heather Joseph this morning. She comes to us from Spark. We just knew that she'd be a great speaker. We had a moment of collective light bulb going off in our minds when we thought to invite Heather to come speak. Heather is director of Spark. She's after her own heart in believing in collective action, very important to sort of unite people around issues that are important to us. I think open access broadly is one of those things. Prior to joining Spark, Heather spent 15 years as a publishing executive in commercial and not-for-profit organizations, so I know she's been thinking a lot about these issues for a long time. So without further ado, thank you, Heather, for coming and speaking.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to talk with you and to open this really interesting, what I hope will be an interesting and important 2 days of conversation on a topic that's obviously near and dear to my heart. What I'm going to try to do is just talk a little bit about, from our perspective at Spark, which is based in Washington, D.C. We're a global alliance of academic and research libraries, and our goal is to set the default to open in research and education. So we have kind of a broad advocacy remit to really move the higher education marketplaces in terms of journals, data, textbooks into a new and open and equitable environment. And I think the emphasis on equity is what I hope comes through in what I'm going to talk about. At Spark, we have used the concept of open access sort of as our guide star for thinking about how to be effective in catalyzing movement towards making open the default in higher education, in research and education. We use the Budapest Open Access Declaration as sort of our guide star. And it's interesting because the Budapest Declaration was written in 2002, and it's 2019, and I can't believe to some degree that I still need to go back, and I feel deeply that I need to go back and open almost every talk that I give, and sometimes conversations that I have with people, by going back and referencing what is it that we set out to do with open access in the first place. In any sort of movement, a social justice movement, I do recognize you get to points where there's uptake, new people come in, and they have their own ideas about directions that the movement should go in, and sometimes intentionally or unintentionally redefine objectives of terms, definitions. And I think it's just super important. It's very important from my perspective and Spark's perspective to make sure that we stay grounded in what drew us to this concept of open access in the first place. When the BOAI, or the Budapest Open Access Initiative, was drafted in 2002, the drafters of that document and statement set out a really ambitious, aspirational vision of what is possible given the emergence of network digital technology. So the Budapest Declaration actually says, an old tradition and a new technology have converged to make possible an unprecedented new public good, right? The new technology, obviously the internet, the old tradition being the willingness of scholars to share the results of their research without expectation for payment, right? Freely sharing and building upon the work of others to create an unprecedented new public good. And the public good that the combination of these two things can enable is nothing short of the immediate, free, worldwide distribution of this information, completely free and unrestricted access to it, and full and unfettered reuse of that material. Really important to remember that open access is not just about being able to get to materials and read it, but also to be able to reuse it and use it fully in the digital environment. What's also really important, and what's changed sort of over the last sort of decade and a half, is the name open access has led a lot of people to focus on the access portion of the show and not so much on what that access should enable us to do. Open access is not the end goal in and of itself, right? It's an enabling strategy. The intention from the outset, when the Budapest Declaration was drafted, was that open is a means to an end. And actually, Spark was fortunate to be one of the organizations that was in the room to help draft this document. And from the get-go, the document was very clear about what open access was meant to enable. It was about opening up access to this layer of information in order to do things that are very specific, to accelerate research, enrich education, share the learning of the rich with the poor and the poor with the rich, make this literature as useful as it can be, and lay the foundation for uniting humanity in a common intellectual conversation and quest for knowledge. There's so much everything in this statement, right? It's not just about research, it's about education. We at Spark, we work on OER and OA, and we have conversations every day about how OER is open access, right? OER materials feed in to OA literature. They're interconnected. It's not just about accessing and reading. It's about unlocking the full utility of this information for text and data mining, for machine learning, for AI. And perhaps most critically, it's not just about amplifying the voices of those who are currently being heard, but lifting up those who currently aren't being heard, right? It's not just sharing the learning of the rich with the poor, right? But the poor with the rich. It's a bidirectional conversation. The notion that it's a conversation is also critical to how we approach our strategies in promoting openness in this space. And I'll talk a lot about the idea of scholarly communication versus simply scholarly publishing. The full vision of open access, I think it's so important to remember, though, that it ensures not just equity in accessing literature, but equity in contributing to this literature. We have a real problem here, right? This is a map that I think most people are familiar with that was created out of the ScholComm lab at Juan Alpern and his team at the ScholComm lab, looking at the distribution of authors against a map of the world sort of scaled by contributions to Scopus and the Web of Science. So this is where these are the voices that are currently being heard in the ScholComm landscape. So we have a real issue in terms of whose voices are being heard in the scholarly communications process right now. The global map is super important, obviously. It's really important for us, Spark, as a membership organization that represents a real diversity, a huge diversity in libraries, to recognize that it also plays out here in the US, right? This is not just the voices that are being marginalized or can't contribute in the way that they need to contribute or should be empowered to contribute in the scholarly communication process come from smaller institutions or less well-resourced institutions or institutions that simply don't have the same kind of wherewithal as R1 institutions to promote the ability of their scholars to be heard in the environment in the way that they should be. And for us, it's key when we're looking at our strategies for promoting open access to consider issues of equity when we make decisions on what initiatives, what policies that we're going to, as an organization, throw our support behind, right? We have an opportunity to really make a difference in changing how that map looks, right? How the representation of whose voices are included in this global conversation on scholarship by making decisions that deliberately design a system that builds equity and inclusivity into its core, in all of its structures, and not just to fall into the thrall of something that's promised as a quick fix, right? But really look at building deliberate long-term structural changes that have equity at its core. And that's at the heart of our decision-making process at Spark about what to support in every aspect that we have to consider. And right now, there's a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different approaches that are being put in front of us as a membership organization and you as library professionals. Hey, this will help, get us to our goal of open access, right? We have to be very deliberate and very conscious about thinking about the consequences of equity in the kinds of business models that we choose to support. Are there winners and losers in the model that we might be being asked to promote? What kind of technology we're choosing? What kind of platforms are we supporting? Is this technology that's available to folks in an equitable kind of way? What rights are we working to empower users of information and also critically producers of information with? what outputs and behaviors are we incentivizing? Are we deliberately putting incentives in place and rewarding? Are they behaviors and outputs that actually take equity into account? It's very, very deliberate, and we use the BOAI document sort of as our reminder to say, this has to be at the core of how we go about making our decisions. I'm sure all of you are well aware of the increasing pressure on us in the community to work to support. We can get to open access by flipping the current journals that are in the market from a subscription model to an open access model. Right? There's lots of initiatives that are out there that are asking us to consider making a flip, and it sounds great, right? To say it's going to be as easy as taking the existing journals that we're currently paying subscription fees for and transferring the money that's already in the market, that's already on the table, that we've already committed for subscriptions, and supporting things like article processing charges. And that journal will then flip from a subscription journal to an open access journal, and the problem is solved. There's initiatives out there like OA 2020, which is being promoted by large funders and increasingly by some in the library community, starting in Germany, but sort of filtering out throughout Europe and making its way here to the US. Plan S at its core, while it talks about promoting a variety of strategies, the intent of Plan S is for these flipping models or transformational agreements, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, to be the basis of the change that takes place. And we wrestled with this at Spark. We have not endorsed OA 2020. We have submitted loads and loads and loads of comments to Plan S, which is more of a policy-making group. And I'm not saying any of this to slam the efforts of people who genuinely do think, this will get us more open access articles in the long run. But we wanted to make sure that we were not just jumping and saying that getting enough open access articles at the end of the day achieves all of our goals, right? We want to make sure we're taking into account all of the other goals that we want to get to. And we asked ourselves, as appealing as it may sound to be able to just change the point of payment, do we really want to simply flip the current system we have from one supported by a point of payment at the subscription endpoint to one that's supported at the point of payment where authors submit their articles? And when we thought about it, we said, well, moving the point of payment is an interesting thing, but there are lots of other problems with the system, as we just talked about, besides simply being able to get access to articles. There's a lack of transparency in the business models of the publishers, of the players who are involved. There's biases in peer review. There's conflation of publication with impact and career value. The issues that are kind of embedded and endemic in this system would stay in place if all we do is change the point of payment. And for us at Spark, and for me personally, that's a real issue, right? That stopped us cold from being able to say that this is a model that we feel comfortable in endorsing. I think probably most importantly, when we look at flipping the current system, keeping the current players entrenched as the power players in the system, we don't see other points of leverage once we flip these journals to open access to address any of the other problems in the system. The map's not going to change, right, in terms of whose voices are included in the process, in the scholarly communications process, if all we do is flip the current system at the point of payment, right? The same inequities and the same kinds of imbalances are going to stay in place and potentially be worsened, right? We run the risk of changing the system from a system where we have a problem of equity in terms of access to information with a system that has huge problems in equity with the ability to contribute, right? If we have APCs as the dominant model, who can pay to play, who can pay to publish, who can pay to speak, to make their voice heard in what is supposed to be us promoting a global conversation, intellectual conversation, will continue to be limited. And that's simply not on the table for us. So we asked ourselves, do we really simply want to flip the current system we have? Or do we want to use open to truly transform the way research is and scholarship is conducted and shared? And our answer is that we want to go for the a real, true transformation. And I probably shouldn't use that word transformation because it's being used in transformative agreements. So I'm gonna edit myself there. We want to go for a full systemic change. And what we're looking to do is not simply flip a point of payment or flip a journal or even flip a system. It's to change the system into an open ecosystem where this global conversation can truly be enabled, where the production, sharing, and use of not just articles, but of all research objects, of all the kinds of outputs of research that are being generated across the research life cycle, maximizes the public good, right? Gets back to the BOAI and gets back down to the business of trying to serve the public good by being rapid, transparent, equitable, and inclusive. And this notion of all research objects across the research life cycle, you start to think about, what does that mean? What would that look like if, as I'm doing research, my data set is openly available for other people to look at? My annotations are open, my code is open, and it's open in something as close to real time as possible. And people can comment on it or use it, or all of a sudden you start to see, this is what a conversation looks like, right? This is not simply saying, we're looking to have a static, continuous system where there's one static point where I say something and then you all have a chance to react some years later, or in a limited time frame and in a limited set of channels. But rather, we start to open up the possibility for people to have this common intellectual conversation, and it's ongoing, and it happens in spaces that are way beyond simply reading journals and articles or even preprints on preprint servers, right? Thinking about all these different kinds of things. So how do we do this, right? That's great to have the vision, and we need to have the vision. But pragmatically and practically, from a library membership organization and from a library organization standpoint, how do you enable this kind of an ecosystem to happen? And first and foremost, for us, it really is focusing on this conversation, remembering that what we're trying to empower is ongoing scholarly communication and not getting hung up on journals. Again, it's going back to the BOAI and that notion of conversation. It's also recognizing that creating this ecosystem is not just a library issue. It's forcing us to think differently about our operations within our institutions and rethinking the way we want to position, and we need to position, the libraries as a locus of expertise, as advocacy, as a lever to really help individual institutions achieve the core mission of the institution, right? Our library goals are simpatico with the mission statements of our organizations. And what we're trying to do as often as we can is to encourage our library members to go back to your institution's mission statement and look at how do the activities that we are advocating for and promoting and contributing to actually allowing our institution to achieve the goals of its vision statement and mission statement more effectively and more efficiently. And in the promotion of kind of setting the default to open and empowering this global conversation, we see so much language in so many different mission statements that talk about the diffusion of knowledge, the sharing of knowledge, public engagement. If you go back and you look, you can make these connections. And starting from that very sort of fundamental strategic standpoint, you can then start to say, I'm actually advocating for us to do this with our budget in order to, yes, achieve openness, but also use openness to allow our institution to achieve our collective aims and being a strategic partner in driving the strategic goals of the institution. So we've really tried to sort of pull up in the strategies that we're promoting and to look at them from an institutional perspective with libraries as a driver, and also to look at them as by necessity as being played out on a global 5-dimensional chessboard. We used to think, well, this is sort of libraries against publishers. That's not it at all. This is to do systemic change. It's a global playing field, and it's like, what is that score? What are the games where you have like different boards that are all on different levels and you have to do things? I think about this all the time. And when I'll talk through each of these things, the 5 sort of strategy areas that we're pushing on, you can see play on these different levels they can't play in a vacuum, right? They all have to work together towards the aim of promoting openness throughout the scholarly communication system. There's 5 things that we're working on, 5 strategies that we're promoting at Spark and that we're kind of going great guns on all at the same time, that we feel will give us as a community the best opportunity to get to the end game that we're trying to get to of this open ecosystem. Changing the rules of the game, right? Underlying rules of the game, and that means looking at resetting the policy environment, shifting our business model thinking away from supporting journals and articles to thinking more about platforms and services, catalyzing changes in what we incentivize in the research and scholarship process, moving out of large-scale subscription packages with commercial publishers, and strategically reinvesting in the new this new open ecosystem, and establishing, or in some cases we have to work to reestablish, community control of critical digital infrastructure. These things have, each of these strategies have elements that are sort of separate, but also have elements that work together to try to get us towards our end goal. In the policy environment, which is what Spark, I think, over the last decade has probably become the most well-known for, we've been working tirelessly to advocate at the local, meaning institutional level, state level, national level, and international level for policies that make open the default in research and education. And that has been an effort that I think we've put heart and soul into, and we couldn't be more pleased with the direction that the policy evolution is going in the United States. In January, we were successful in getting the Open Government Data Act passed, which makes open and machine readable the default mode for all government information. It's foundational. It defines what open and machine readable means. It enshrines a definition of open licenses into U.S. law, into U.S. code, and it provides us with, finally, a platform to say, this is the way information is supposed to be shared in the U.S. It does not explicitly cover research articles and research data, but they are a category of U.S. government information. And now, as we move from this bill being signed into law in January and into the implementation phase, every meeting that's happening at the federal agencies that produce science, every meeting, they're asking the question, how do we live up to the letter of the law with research data and research articles, which is a fantastic conversation for us to be having. There's going to need to be additional policy work to support the layer of information that we're interested in, right? Research data and articles. The current U.S. policy that covers this layer of material is the memorandum that came out of the White House in 2013, calling for public access to publicly funded research data and articles. Right now, the current parameters that apply are not really open. They're public access, right? There's a 12-month embargo period still allowed for scholarly articles. And research data, it's just a very sort of amorphous time frame of we want you to kind of make it available. So there's a big effort afoot to kind of work hand in glove with implementation of the Open Government Data Act to update the 2013 memo and to bring U.S. policy in line with the goals of the Open Government Data Act and emerging standards that are happening around the world. So the emphasis now is trying to get either well, first and foremost, an update of the Holdren memo, so an executive memorandum out of the White House that will move to zero embargo requirements, full reuse rights, and also require that the data needed to validate the conclusions of an article be made available immediately, and that the rest of research data generated out of public funds be made available under the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So there's a huge, we're doing a huge amount of advocacy in terms of trying to move the needle forward in resetting the rules of the road. We're also doing that, as you know, not just in the research journal environment and research data environment, but also on the educational materials, on textbooks, on learning management systems, working on the state level as well as on the national level. In the policy environment, it's also really, really critical to know that public funders are not the only players. And I think Plan S is helping to sort of drive that home, right? That private funders and foundations control a great deal they wield a great deal of influence and potential influence in helping us get to the goals that we're trying to get at. At Spark, 2.5 years ago, we worked to establish something called the Open Research Funders Group, which brings together on a monthly basis representatives from some of the largest funders of research in the United States, and we're starting to add international funders for conversations, to build a community and a community of practice among research funders who also share the belief that using open as an enabling strategy will help them achieve their core goals as funders faster. It's been a really fascinating experience to work with this group. People tend to think, well, the Gates Foundation has this hugely strong open access policy, right? They require open access to their funded research articles and data on day one. They're a bastion of strength in the open movement. There's 2 staff people at the foundation who know what this is all about. Like, I'm not making it up. Every foundation that we talked to, we found something that I know we felt in all of our libraries. I'm like one of 3 people that's talking about open and promoting open in my library. And when I start to get tired or I worry or I don't understand what Plan S is asking me to do, I don't know if a transformational agreement is good or bad. I'm alone. I don't know where to turn. I need people to help me, who are my peers, work through this. That's what we've been able to establish with the ORFG. I think people were initially saying, oh, you're bringing all these funders together and they're going to pool massive amounts of money and support open access projects and infrastructure. Yes, someday we hope we'll get there. But right now, honestly, what it has done is provided an environment for these people to get together and to feel confident and comfortable and mastering what are they talking about when they're talking about open access, really getting a sense of expertise. As they've gotten together, some funders are definitely more out in front and saying, okay, we got it. We're picking things up and we're starting to run with. We're using open to achieve our core mission. What does that look like? We're going to really do some interesting things. The Wellcome Trust is one of those organizations. Gates is another of those organizations, I will say. The reason they have 2 staff people is that they had staff changes, so they'll rebuild their internal capacity. But one of the things that the funders are doing out of getting together is saying, we recognize, right? We know we share this vision of wanting to get to an open ecosystem, and we're funders, so we can kind of not short circuit, but we have a straighter path to getting to making sure that the research outputs of our funded research are made openly available. There are things that we can do that other folks maybe can't do right away. And one of the things that they're doing is establishing and launching platforms, their own communications platforms for research outputs to be communicated. So instead of saying, if you take money from the Wellcome Trust, you have to publish in X, Y, or Z journal, and you need to make it open, or you need to go to some other platform. Wellcome Gates, the European Commission has a tender out for this. The African Academy of Sciences is establishing an open platform where they will have an environment for you to put your data set, for you to put your preprint, for you to put your code, and to be able to share it immediately. They're thinking about kind of moving away from the notion that the first step has to be publication of an article, or that the only step has to be publication from an article. And they can enable it, right? People aren't not going to take money from the Wellcome Trust to do research just because they're asking you to make your stuff available on an open platform. Right? You're going to take the money and do it. And they're helping to influence other funders to do this. That scares the bejesus out of the publishing world, right? And rightly so, because it is a short circuit. It's circumventing their authority. But for us, it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to think about, what does the world look like if funders are saying our desire is to enable this ongoing real-time conversation, scholarly conversation, right, on our own platforms. That's really interesting, right? The
the opportunity for us then to think is, if this is the way the world is moving, then what do we do with our library budgets? Like, what is it that we support? And how can we think about supporting more of a movement in this direction? We have this chance to shift our business model thinking then away from paying from journals and articles, and in thinking about what does that environment then look like on Wellcome Trust's platform, for example, if all of their data sets, all of their code, all of their articles or snippets or all these different research objects are put out there on day one. Does it mean peer review never happens? Does it mean validation doesn't happen? Does it mean we just have chaos on the platforms? It could, but actually what I think it means is this is an opportunity for those organizations that actually have the skill sets to make sense of this information, right? Scholarly societies, disciplinary guilds, disciplinary communities, to look and say that those services that we've been applying to make sense of articles, to make sense of information behind the scenes under the auspices of journals can now be applied in the open directly on platforms, and we can look at paying direct fee for services for those skills. It's an opportunity for scholarly societies, for guilds to say, what is it that we have that's our competency, that's a unique value that only we can bring to the picnic? And it's the community and the ability to do the services that they're currently only doing on journals and applying it in a much larger environment. And we find when we talk to scholarly societies about that, they're really worried because they don't understand like how something has to break down for this to open up. But when you start to talk to them about everything that you're doing in this tiny little package for a journal can be applied in a bigger environment into more objects, and we can pay you directly for it, there's actually opportunities for more revenue streams and from different sources, right? So what I hope we have in front of us and what I hope we can communicate is an opportunity to really change the level and the basic fundamental structure of what we're talking about when we're talking about in terms of supporting open communication business models. This gives us an opportunity too, because it's driven by funders, to explore new partnerships, to underwrite transitions, and to do some experimentation with different disciplinary guilds in conjunction with not just funders and societies, but funders, libraries, different layers of our institutions, right? This is part of being embedded in the strategic direction of our institutions and societies. And the funders are really interested in this. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute is the largest funder of biomedical research here in the US. And a couple of months ago, they held a meeting where they brought scholarly societies in and said, we're interested in working with you over the course of the next 5-10 years to figure out how to do these transitions, and we'll put money on the table. And they bought some libraries in, and libraries are like, we're thinking about canceling our big commercial packages. We have money that we could put on the table. We'd love to do it with you, HHMI, and other funders, rather than doing this in a vacuum. So these conversations are getting started, and we need and want to promote more of them. With the research funders being interested and so involved in this process, it opens up another opportunity, right, to catalyze change in what is it that we're incentivizing in terms of research communication. How to approach this? When we first started talking about open access, if I have one regret, it's that we said internally in the beginning of the movement, we can't talk about tenure and promotion at the same time that we're promoting this brand new idea of open access, this new communication channel. That's a big enough challenge as a library community. If we start to talk about tenure and promotion reform at the same time, the whole thing will blow up, right? We talked about it as the third rail of open access. If I have one regret, it's that we didn't just suck it up and do it at that moment in time. We should have done it. We would be much farther along. The reality is that from the library community perspective, we have very little leverage in changing tenure and promotion, and certainly in research assessment for funding. But the funders have a shit ton of leverage, right? They are where the leverage exists, and they recognize it. So one of the things that we realized that we had to get smart about doing, and the strategies that we're pursuing here, is to say, we recognize what libraries can and can't do in this environment. We're not going to focus on what we can't do. We're going to focus on what we can do. And we're going to focus on our brand capital as a library organization, Spark, and the cachet and the respect that we've built up with the research funders, starting with the Open Research Funders Group members who now know us. We convene them. They pay us to convene them, frankly. We are their backbone to move into all things open. So we're going to use that capital that we've built up with them and move them, push them in the direction of saying, you guys need to address incentives and rewards up front as you're moving into this. Otherwise, things aren't going to move forward. And what we did was suggest to them that it would be very useful for them as leaders, leading providers of research funders, to meet with their counterparts in the higher education community at the leadership level, at the president, provost level, to have this conversation. We as funders are committed to using open as an enabling strategy to achieve our core mission. We now have policies in place that require our funded researchers to do this. Here's how it's playing out. I want to fund Megan to do research on her campus. She takes a grant and she looks at it and she goes, I really want to take this money, but you're asking me to make my article open on day one and my data set open on day one. My tenure and promotion guidelines are asking me to go to a single title journal, Science, Nature, Cell, or a high impact journal. I am really kind of worried. Megan should never be the person who's caught in the middle, right, from a funder's perspective or from a university perspective. What can we do as the funder and the university leader to take that friction out of this process so that we can keep the flow of money coming to your campuses? The ORFG funders represent about $16 billion worth of research funding going on to U.S. university campuses every year. So university presidents will listen. So we asked them we went to the National Academy of Sciences and asked them if they would convene an ongoing conversation between the leadership of the ORFG and university presidents and provosts, and the Academy said yes. So in February, the first meeting of a roundtable that's consisted of leadership from both of these layers of leadership in the community was seated. They'll meet twice a year for the next 3 years. And their aim is to realign the incentives that underpin the research process to better support open science and open scholarship. Because the research funders were at the table first, we were able to attract sort of the layer of leadership from institutions that, quote unquote, have to be at the table for it to be viewed as influential, and the conversation will then be branched out and diffused into the community. After the first meeting, we really weren't sure how this was going to go. But at the first meeting, after a few hours of sort of dancing around each other, and I think the university representative recognizing that the funders were all in, they were serious, they knew each other, there was a camaraderie from the funders from having interacted under the ORFG. The funders referred to themselves as we. The university presidents were like, okay, maybe this is something that we want to be involved with. And by the end of the meeting, they had self-organized into 6 different ongoing working groups with initiatives. This is an action-oriented roundtable. So at the end of the 3 years, we're not interested in coming out with, just some, a paper that says, here's what we should think about doing next. We want there to be actual demonstrations of actions being taken on campuses. There's 6 working groups, including one that is looking at conversations between presidents and provosts and department heads and deans on sending a signal from the leadership perspective that these incentives need to change, we need to support open, but I can't tell you how to do it. Your discipline, your department has your own unique needs. So what we want to do is set a model where this is the goal, and you guys percolate up to the provost level how it should be done, how it can be done in your department. And then that will be shared among different disciplines and different universities. So real opportunity for progress to be made. And this is just one sort of example in that strategy. In the meantime, right, the library community is supporting these roundtables, and we're playing a role in managing the working groups, helping to set the agenda, also setting the agendas for the ongoing meetings of this group, and helping to form new working groups as the need arises. The next meeting of the roundtable is Thursday and Friday of next week. So There'll be actually a public aspect of that meeting. You can, if you're not in DC, if you're in DC, you can come to it. If you're not, there'll be like a Zoom channel that'll be open so that you can be part of the conversation as well. And I really encourage you to think about being a part of it and giving some feedback on what needs to get done. Of course, at the same time, one of the things that's in front of us and that's sort of uppermost in libraries' minds and things that we can do and a point of leverage that I think we get the most questions about is moving out of big deals and reinvesting strategically in the new ecosystem that we want to support. There's a prime opportunity for us now to consider how we want to individually and collectively reinvest in this new ecosystem, again, as institutions and not just as libraries. When we're working with our member libraries, we're trying to help folks think through scenarios about how you can leverage negotiations to move towards achieving your library's vision of an open ecosystem, to not sort of fall prey to this is someone else's vision and, yes, there may be interesting pieces of it that I want to take on board, but what is it that my campus is uniquely desires to do? What does our end game really look like? Scholarly communication, the scholarly conversation is made up of so much more than just reading and publishing. When we limit our negotiations or our outcomes in rethinking negotiations to read and publish and read, or offsetting costs for reading to publish to read, we're limiting our potential outcomes. What else? Are we really not creative enough to think about what else might I use subscription savings to reinvest in? There's so many other kinds of things we can think about supporting. And we have campuses who are talking about renegotiating, reestablishing, redirecting their relationships and their investments in subscriptions, taking money out in order to support important activities like getting articles from generated on their campuses deposited into their local institutional repository or into subject repositories, or doing that with that-end data. Making sure the contracts cover computational uses, right? We have this whole push towards AI and machine learning, text and data mining, because that is the future of scholarship and research. How can we promote that in our contracts? Rights retention, supporting data analytics, supporting taking money out of subscriptions and supporting locally owned platforms and infrastructure. So many other kinds of opportunities to think about promoting and incorporating into negotiations rather than limiting them to read and publish or publish and read. And just as a note, we're working on preparing additional, at Spark, resources for supporting campus negotiations. We're creating a new community of practice. A call went out yesterday, actually, for the first community call in this regard. We're looking at providing data to make sure that when you walk into negotiations that we don't have this information imbalance where the publisher knows everything, as they always do, and we know about what they're doing, trying to create contracts, collect contracts, financial information, all different kinds of information that will help equal that imbalance, and also supporting the development and use of enhanced OA discovery tools or alternative access materials. I think finally, what's really interesting to know, and what's probably the most encouraging and overwhelmingly dauntingly discouraging at the same time, is that the publishers know, right, that the open genie is out of the bottle, and that we're not going back to the mode of subscriptions, and that they control content in a traditional sense. They know their margins are under pressure, and their margins are huge, right? Let's not forget that this is an industry that has some of the highest profit margins out of any companies operating in the world today. Higher profit margins in two scholarly publishers, in Elsevier and Springer, than in Google, than in Apple, than in Coca-Cola, right? There's a ton of money at stake. So they haven't been sitting still and saying, we're just going to take this lying down. So they're working on promoting agreements to preserve their revenue from the content for as long a period as possible. So when you look at a transformational agreement and they're asking you for another 3 to 5 year commitment, think about that. But they're also, as you know, shifting into locking up infrastructure and moving into a position to control primary data and data analytics on our campuses. So one of the things that Spark has done, and the thing that Spark has been focusing on the most fully, is to make sure that we're providing our community with a deep understanding of the strategy of commercial publishers in this landscape, and providing you with materials that will allow us to build strategies on our individual institutions to preempt these content providers, these commercial publishers, from locking down this layer of the market. The landscape analysis came out last year. In the next month, we're going to be publishing a solutions roadmap to help our institutions understand sort of 3 broad categories of actions and then specific actions under these categories that we can take to allow this layer of the market to be locked open for competition. So the goal is that to create a comprehensive strategy to catalyze progress towards the full vision of this open ecosystem that's truly equitable for everyone. Really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.